And welcome, everybody. This is the old school, Dr. Stephen Bourgeois and Mr. Ross Miller. No doctor title in front of my name, but we are two old fogies of the teaching profession, and we're here to kind of illuminate some of the issues that are facing teachers and teaching in general, and we're also providing some possible solutions. And so this is what the purpose of the podcast is, and hopefully you find something in it that you can walk away from nourished, enriched, empowered to move forward, maybe affect change.
You know, I just walked away. You probably noticed that because I was getting so bored with your introduction. It just sounded like words happening there at that point.
Weren't words, or poetry. It's a combination of timbre, pitch, the qualities of a good speech.
You know, you break out new words every week. I think you plan this. You have a list of words on the side.
I do. I have a dictionary and the thesaurus right here. So
really, what's another word for thesaurus?
It's the second time you've issued that joke. We've only done 6 podcasts now.
Every time it's out there. You know whose joke that is?
What's that?
Remember Stephen Wright, the guy who was?
Yes.
Yeah, he was sort of, I guess, sardonic. He'd always kind of scratch his head, and so his delivery was way better than mine.
My favorite Stephen Wright joke was that he was born a cesarean, so now every time he leaves the house, he goes through the window. Always thought that was kind of a funny joke.
These jokes take a moment to appreciate. I didn't laugh at all. Okay. My goodness, Stephen Wright. Let's switch really quickly before we get too off track here.
Sure.
You proposed a topic, so why don't you introduce it?
The topic today is teacher burnout. And last week, for those of us who listened to last week, and if you haven't, it's a mere click away. But last week we had talked about the idea that I have trouble with meetings. I think that was made quite clear in the 37 or so minutes that we rambled on last week. But I think it's interesting to note that while certainly a lack of maturity goes into what happened, that was also the time when I had gone through my own phase of burnout. You remember we had a couple of young teachers that were, as our boss suggested, was scared to talk to me. And, just because I had become quite surly.
So you're talking about your own personal burnout rather than everybody else. I like that because you actually did burn out. I watched it. It was really fun, if I remember.
But I don't know. Have you ever gone through a phase like that? Not necessarily what I did, but have you ever gone through a phase that could be characterized as burnout?
I had something which my wife lovingly called my spring freakout. And I took it so far as that every spring, about this time actually, I would be hunting for jobs and looking outside of education, anything. But I was pretty much done, and every year was a new year, and I was on the fence, and I actually left twice, and I left a lot of positions just to get any change, get a different school job, but also left the profession entirely. So yes, I've burned out, but it wasn't as entertaining as yours.
Is it burnout if it happens on a regular basis, or is that just some sort of psychosis?
Well, I think it was a misplaced career choice, most likely, and so because I wouldn't you think that if you're right for a job and you love it and it's your calling, that you're not going to be thinking about leaving every day that has a Y in it, basically.
I don't know. Well, I think part of what creates burnout is a misunderstanding about the function of work. At least that's how I got out of my particular funk.
Okay, that sounds intelligent.
Yes.
I don't understand it, but go ahead. So you mentioned funk and...
Well, here's the deal. So one of the things that I have speculated about is how teaching is, the paradigm in which teaching is discussed. And oftentimes it is discussed in what can only be described as quasi-religious terminology. You did it a few minutes ago, talking about somebody's calling. The notion of someone's calling was generally connected to be called into the ministry or to be called to serve God or something to that extent. And I think the fact that a lot of people tend to speak of teaching in such terms creates a misconception about the job itself. Because then once you start to burn out, the question becomes, oh my goodness, I was supposed to be about the children. I was supposed to be about the kids. This was all supposed to be about making sure that the future generation can somehow carry on. And now all of a sudden, I don't want to do that. So you start to sit there and you start to kind of ramble in your head. Well, if I'm not a teacher, then what am I? And I think that's part of the problem. It's part of the problem in a couple of areas. One, it's a part of a problem when it comes to teacher burnout. It's also part of the problem in how easily it is to take advantage of teachers, because anytime a teacher complains too loudly, then one of the retorts will be, well, this is for the students, right? And this is why we do this job. And most teachers are like, yeah, I guess so, and then all of a sudden you end up doing way more than you ideally should.
It's a real hard profession, first of all. And, I've described it as missionary work and in joking, because they don't pay much.
Well, yes.
So you've signed on for a job that's really hard and you don't get much money for it, or certainly recognition. We've both spent a lot of time in Germany and been around German and European teachers, and they're thought of quite differently. And I don't know that they burn out because they're getting paid really well, and their retirement is quite impressive compared to what we receive.
Well, I think, when you have that kind of the way others treat you and the way others view you, when you lack that respect societally, when you lack that respect from administration, I think one of the things you turn to is you try to find other ways to trumpet what you do. Well, it's not about money, or well, it's not about accolades. It's about the children. It's about the kids. And not only does that horribly distort what it is that you're supposed to be doing, but it's also kind of a breeding ground for other potential problems as far as like what we do, how we do things in the classroom. And I think that's the source. If I can be so bold as to extrapolate my issues with everybody else's issues, which certainly is problematic, but from my own experience and from the experience of people who I know have gone through this is part of the issue.
Well, I do study this, and really on a high level, not getting into the weeds of the details of why. But I have a survey business, and I send out hundreds and hundreds and thousands of surveys to teachers, and there's always one item that says, I intend to return to my position next year. And the results are typically around 90%. This year, they've dropped, probably by about 10 points because of COVID and those situations.
Right.
That'll change. It'll creep back up, we expect. But what I found interesting is that I'm asking it in one point in time. Maybe it's February 1st. Maybe it's the end of August. And that answer, for me personally, maybe you could talk to this also, changed from day to day. And it's a level of agreement. I'm give it a 5, I'm definitely coming back. But it shifted. And for me, one of the low points was always the August professional development. That was one time when I looked for the exits, because I really, I didn't, you talk about not liking faculty meetings. I hated that. To the point
Right.
where, I would, from my parking lot, drive to the district office and park and think, do I walk in and resign? Or I have to subject myself to, 4 more days of this. And it was torture, literally torture. When I got to my classroom, they eventually let you kind of prepare, things jumped up quite a bit.
Right.
And I saw my students, it was great. And then it started to kind of drop, so it was not the same, I guess, day to day, month to month. Is that your experience?
What's interesting, because I want to start with an observation you once made, that you can judge faculty morale by how many people back into their parking spots.
Can you describe that in a little more detail? I'm not sure if people know what that means.
Well, as far as like, instead of pulling into it face first, front end first, where you have to kind of back up to get out of the place, if you back into your spot, it allows you the quickest means to leave the facility once the job is done. And I think there's something to that. I think there's something to the idea that and right now we got a lot of people backing into parking spots. And again, I don't know how serious you take that, but I find it and I have paid attention to it ever since you first brought that up. I have noticed it now. So
it's a good word picture, and I'd like to study it, quite frankly, and I can do that just by collecting data. But I think you're implying a few things. Number one, they're ready for the weekend every day. It's like they're ready to roll. I've also wondered, about when teachers arrive and when they leave. The ones who are really locked in are probably going to get there early. I always wanted to arrive 90 minutes before I saw a student. That was always my goal, because otherwise the day is very stressful. You're always catching up. On the other end of it, leaving, I kind of look down on teachers to some extent who would just leave right when the bell rang and kind of beat their students to the car. Right. That's pretty impressive. It's a real busy parking lot, and you sneak out to beat the traffic. And then there's a continuum after that, and we don't want teachers that are really, really late either, because those are the ones who are driving themselves crazy. Right. There's a sweet spot, but the backing into the parking place is probably a sign, that they're not there for those. They want to get out of there as soon as possible.
I think as far as the day-to-day kind of looking at the job, I think like any job, I mean, there are days where you walk out of there going, man, what a great day. And then there's days you walk out and you're like, God bless it, that was a horrible day. Am I really cut out to do this gig? And so I think it is a day-to-day proposition. I think you interview or you survey somebody on February 1st, February 2nd, you're likely to get a different answer. It depends upon what happens. And, you once provided the visual of how for the last 25 years, I've agreed to lock myself into a room full of teenagers. And sometimes that can be fun. And sometimes that can be horrific, And so I think because they're fickle, I think your reaction to the job is fickle. And that's what creates the uncertainty. Now, my uncertainty this year is heightened by the fact that technically I could retire after this year. Now, the problem is that I have a 6-year-old. And so retiring not to work is not really an option. It would, really what I'm banking on is that millions of people start listening to this podcast. But if,
sorry, I'm laughing internally at that.
It's going to happen. We have the ability, but I think one of the things that, I think my situation is a little bit different simply because I can retire. And as the great Bill Parcells once said, once you're thinking about retirement, you're retired. It's just a question of you going through the formality of putting in the paperwork. And so I think it's fighting that feeling. I think it's, and I had a friend of mine who, God rest his soul, he's dead now, but I had a friend of mine who he used to work for a company and he stayed around long past when he could retire. And I once asked him, I said, how long are you going to work? He said, I'm going to work till they piss me off. And then I'm just going to walk out. And that's a very freeing notion, from someone in my position. It's a very liberating sense. But your average teacher doesn't have that luxury. So
no, they're pretty well trapped. There are a lot of things on the side of not leaving your position. I think teachers believe they're trained to be teachers and really lack confidence to try something else. Mm-hmm. So they're risking their state retirement. So there's a lot behind that decision. We have talked about meetings and how we don't like them. I really don't like professional development, particularly day after day after day. Just the simple faculty meeting is stressful. But you alluded to this. We as teachers spend most of our day with that door closed and students. And we'll go outside and watch students walk through the hallway, and then we'll go back and teach again. repeat. We'll have lunch with faculty members, maybe in the faculty room. We've talked about that maybe that's not a great place to be if you're thinking about burnout. Getting inspired to put on gasoline on a fire, maybe. But let's maybe deconstruct what happens in the classroom, because there's something about that relationship and the time with students, in our case, high school students, that might contribute to that need to look for the exits.
Well, I will tell you that for me, now other people may have a different experience. For me, when I leave the classroom, it will not be because of students necessarily. It'll be because of other things beyond my classroom that send me on my way. The kids, that's too transient of a influence on things. Some days they're great, some days they're horrible, and we're talking about the same kids. And so I don't know how much you should look to the students as the reason why you're ready to leave or not leave. I think a lot of it, what some teachers respond to, is either the higher ups, the kind of the structure of the school day, the degree to which a teacher feels supported by the administration. I think that has a big part in whether a teacher sticks it out or not. And so I think as far as in the classroom, that can certainly have an influence. But again, I think it's too many variables within the classroom. Outside the classroom is another matter altogether.
Well, the basic level of being able to manage your classroom in a way that makes you comfortable. That is I guess the first level of being satisfied as a teacher, and a lot of teachers aren't able to do that, so they're just struggling to be in a room with students. For me, it gave me energy. I liked my students and enjoyed the ongoing conversation. But the struggle is when you have additional responsibilities, when you have to turn in grades, you have to fill out reports, go to ARG meetings, all these extra responsibilities. If it's just your job, you've already planned for that. You know what you're going to do. But anything extra, or you have to talk to a parent, these outside forces, I think, are coming in more readily once we got into state testing so intensely. And then also the idea of a grade portal, where people are watching your every move from afar.
Well, we used to wax whimsical about the notion of, whether, parents knew the grades or the students knew the grades. We were the sole keepers of the grades. And then once the portal came in, it did two things. One, it put more highlight on the day-to-day happenings rather than looking at it holistically, which from an educational standpoint, you can't tell anything from a day-to-day view of what's happening in the classroom. You have to look at it holistically. The second thing it did was it created this overemphasis on grades. I mean, it was already there. This just added fuel to the fire. And so I think one of the things that also can lead to a teacher burning out has to do with the kind of interactions they have with parents. And some parents can be like sharks in the water. They smell blood. They're going to come after a teacher if they feel like the teacher is not confident in their grading, if they're not confident in what they're doing. And that creates a greater level of uncertainty with the teacher. The teacher doesn't want to have conversations with parents. And it kind of builds on one on top of the other.
So we're really getting into autonomy, and I would agree that's probably the biggest factor for other teachers is probably other things. But I want to jump way back to when I was a student. I won't even say what year that was, but it was,
God.
long
one room schoolhouse in Oregon.
But I remember, my teachers giving me grades, and I did really well in high school. I had one grade that wasn't great in a math class, and but in all my classes, until I got that progress report at 9 weeks, I didn't know what my grade was. And your grade was based upon your participation and your test scores and whatever the teacher thought.
Right.
Same thing from the parents. They got the progress report and they had nothing to go on, to complain, and the same, and nobody expected anything different.
Mm.
and then when you get your semester grade, well, it's probably related to that, progress. So you have an idea, but what happened, that you open up your grade book to the student, to the rest of the school, because no one in the school got to see that. It was
Right.
actually sacred and totally private. And now in real time, parents are getting alerts. If anybody drops below a 70 on an assignment, alert both parents, and emails. Do you remember when that happened?
Well, it didn't happen until I moved into my last district, my current district.
Okay.
I think before the technology wasn't there. Now certainly in my first gig is when they started the kind of the digital grade book, but that was solely for the teacher, and that was for ease of turning in grades. That had nothing to do with interaction with the parents. The parents certainly didn't have access to it. The students did not have access to it. But then my second gig and third gig, it just wasn't something that was there. It seems to be only in the last 5 to 7 years that I've seen it. And it certainly has a detrimental effect. And part of that, going back to the notion of, teacher burnout, what's going to force a teacher to reconsider what it is they're doing. And here's the other thing. And I don't know if this is controversial or not, but it seems like teaching is the only profession that not only allows for, but encourages outsiders to critique it. People who ideally have no idea about the profession or how to teach or what it means to learn or what have you.
You're talking about administrators.
Well, administrators, parents, right. all the sort of influence that goes into what a teacher does within a classroom. That's why you got some schmucks out there who think anybody can do this job. The old line, those who can do, those who can't teach. Now, I got a particular colorful metaphor for you, for those who think that, but
yeah, that bothers me too. And the signs, the billboards on, want to teach? Okay.
When can you start? Yeah. Is that all it takes? You just got to want to? Well, rat's bit. Well, let's go then. Let's teach. But I think we invite this, we allow it because there's not the stomach to resist it. And because of that, I think that's part of what makes people say, you know what, there's got to be a better way to make a living. There's got to be a better job out there. And that's where you have your spring freak out that you so lovingly described earlier.
The freak out is real, definitely.
Freak out, the struggle is real.
Having somebody breach that classroom space. We're talking about an administrator with a clipboard or just a friendly walkthrough. Earlier in my career, that was a huge deal. And they would give you a date, and actually they would give you a range of days, which I really didn't like. But they said it so casually. I'll be in sometime this week, and I really wanted to say, wait a minute, how about at 2:30 on Wednesday, and you'll be in there for 15 minutes, right? But they'll say, no, this week I'll pass by. And so, for me, that was a big deal, because you want that over with, but you have to be freaking prepared on every minute for every class. It was very stressful for a young teacher. And once it was over, you'd breathe a sigh of relief, and you'd have this innocuous discussion maybe, or some numbers in cells about how you did. But that was a big deal. And I wonder, you evaluate teachers to some extent as a department head. Is from the teacher's perspective, do you think that's a worry?
Oh, it's a worry, because I think most people want to be thought of as doing a good job. If you're a conscientious individual, you want people to think you're doing a good job. And so I think for a lot of teachers, that is a concern. Now, for me, I'm at a point where I don't care. It's not that I don't care whether people think I'm doing a good job or not, but I'm also not going to do a dog and pony show just because an administrator shows up, And so, the classroom is what it is. And it doesn't affect me as much, but I think for the younger folks and even I can't even be blanketed with the old timers, but I think there is a lot of people that want to be thought of well, by their bosses. And there's nothing wrong with that either. So
there was a built-in dog and pony show when you're a German teacher. It's pretty simple, and it's like the light started flickering. All I do is speak German with my students back and forth, and eventually the observer will go away and write this review. Dr. Bourgeois, his students speak fluent German. Someone actually wrote that down. And it was a real easy thing to do. So once I got that idea, I thought, I'm not going to worry anymore. We just go all in on German, and kids know it. I know it. And everybody's happy in the end.
I remember a couple of years ago, a vice principal came in, and I could you can always tell there's a shift in the force in the room. Even if I can't see who's coming into the room, of course the kids can't because they're looking towards the door. And so you can tell that there's something has changed. And then I know someone's in the room. And then the vice principal is sitting there and he's kind of making notes. And I remember casually remarking to the students, I said, it's a little bit like being at the zoo, isn't it? You know, where you being judged for your quote unquote natural behavior inside of a cage. But there is something. You have to have some type of ability to evaluate teachers. And maybe there's simply no good way of doing it, but it does provide its own comedic effects from time to time.
Well, there's probably a more direct approach. You know, that administrator goes into the room with a clipboard. He could turn to a student and say, how's this joker up in front doing? And they'll answer him for sure. Oh, we really like Mr. Miller, but and then they'll give you a list of things. But we're really afraid for real conversations with students. That's the last thing we want, right?
Right.
They would definitely answer that
because they're the wild card in the bunch. So
I think so. So what else about burnout? The term itself is kind of interesting because the implication to me is that once you burn out, you can't recover.
Well, that's true. But I think for me, the turning point for me, and I hope as you did, as much as you enjoyed the burnout phase that I went through, hopefully you also appreciate it as a friend and a colleague and a trusted advisor and mentor. You also enjoyed when I started to come out of it. Did you?
No.
Okay.
I was crushed. We drove to school together for about 5 years, and I look forward to that part.
But I think, what I did was that for me personally, and again, I'm speaking generally about something that's a very individual experience, but for me, coming out of being burned out had to do with me reevaluating what I was doing as a job. And I remember a conversation I had with my godfather. And my godfather used to be a longshoreman on the docks in Baltimore. And it's a tough job. You got to unload ships. You got to load them up. It's a tough gig. And I remember asking him one time, I said, do you like your job? He goes, and he looked at me like I had 3 heads. He said, what do you mean? Do I like my job? I said, well, do you like doing it? He said, what does that have to do with anything? I'm not doing this job because I like it. I'm doing this job because I get paid well, and then I'm able to provide for my family, and I'm able to live a life outside the school. And when I remembered that, I think there was like a switch in my head. So gone was the notion of this rather evangelical path that I was on in the classroom. And it became more of simply a part of my life and not my life altogether. And at that point, I still love working. I still love teaching. I still love dealing with the students. I just love my family and friends more, and so the money that I make is the importance of that money has to do with what I can do with my family and what I can do with friends and what I can do over the summer or something of those lines. And so I think once the job stops becoming everything, then I think you can take a healthier approach to what it is you do. And maybe you become a more tolerable person to be around, unless you happen to be the person driving in the car with you, going home or going to school on a regular basis. But
it was pretty fun. You mentioned money, and there's a built-in disincentive to teach, which is that you have maybe a 1 or 2% increase of pay if you're lucky every year. In many jobs, any type of job. If you work for a company and you stay for 5 years, you have promotions, and eventually you're making a lot more money. And late in your career, you're not just 30% above where you were at the beginning, something like that. So for a teacher, they have some potential mobility, but it's to move out of teaching.
Right.
And I know you've seen a lot of teachers who get their master's, their administrative certificate, and leave the fold. But so there are some examples or some options. But for somebody who is a teacher, you're really stuck in that, and you can kind of tell what your retirement will be. It's all in a little chart.
Right.
I wonder if that has anything to do with the dissatisfaction of teachers.
As far as the pay goes?
Well, just I mean, we've talked before about teachers complaining a lot, and maybe there's something to that they're let's face it, they're underpaid for the importance of the work they're doing.
I agree with that. At the same time, I'm always baffled by teachers who complain about it, because I'm like, did you not know? Was it your thought that we actually got paid a lot, and then you entered into a profession and lo and behold, you weren't getting that much money? I mean, I don't understand. It's like complaining that the sun comes up every day. Did you not know that the sun was going to come up today? I mean, so to a certain degree, I think you could have a low paying job, but I think if the situation within the job is better, I think people are willing to work for less money if they feel more respected, if they feel more valued, if they have more agency, autonomy, or whatever you want to call it within the classroom. If there's a level of respect for them, I think people are willing to handle a job that pays less. I think the problem comes in when you get paid less and you don't get much of anything else out of that list. I think that's when you have problems. But I think the pay in and of itself is not the issue. I think it's everything around the pay, and the pay is just an easy thing to talk about because it's an easy thing to fix. Potentially, all that other mess that requires a complete system overhaul. But the pay, well, that's just a vote by the school board. We want to give all of our teachers $5,000 more. Bam, there you go, done and dusted. But everything else that requires a complete rethink of how we educate, and that's not going to be done, at least not done quickly. And I think therein lies the issue.
Well, it used to be that teachers would get a bad rap because they supposedly had June, July, and August off, which has kind of shrunk, I guess you would say,
Yeah.
to early August. You're doing professional development or whatever. Is that a factor in you teaching this long, that you would have relatively long summer vacations?
I think the summer vacations do allow you to recharge. It is a difficult job. It requires a lot from you. And other schools around the world, that they don't necessarily have the 3 months off in the summer or 2.5 months as it is now, but they have throughout the year, they have vacations. And so I think there is something about a job that is as challenging as teaching is, that it should have some of these perks, if you want to call them that, because it is a recharge. For me, it was a recharge. I think if I didn't have quite that full summer, I think it would be problematic because I put a lot into what I do. And because of that, I need to be able to get some kind of distance from it to be able to kind of appreciate it the next go around. And, but certainly I think there's some people that do it just for, and those are the idiots in the profession, those who are doing it for the 3 best reasons to be a teacher, is
they back their car into there.
Yeah. So I don't know. I kind of lost the question now, but
that's okay. It was a great question, but I think you did lose it. We've talked a lot about some of the challenges of teaching, but on the other side is that we as teachers get some things that other professions don't get.
Sure, most definitely.
And the closeness with to have a conversation with a group of students, we start to love that, and we're so comfortable with that, and we're helping kids, we're raising them to some extent individually. they're not all of ours. I found that we, as teachers, connect with different kids. So the faculty all has their students. But there's something that you can't really talk about because it's almost, you have to experience it to understand it. I can give one example. When I left teaching, I left to play jazz piano in a bunch of bars and restaurants and hotels, and I enjoyed that, but there was something missing. And as I was doing that, I noticed I was in a very nice hotel, playing in the lobby. And suddenly there were three high school students who came over to the piano. Have I told you the story?
No.
Yeah. So they were high school boys, and they looked a little rough around the edges. And I could see the people in the lounge were going, "Oh no, how is he going to handle this?" He's a quiet jazz pianist, and so I finished the song, and started talking to them, and I asked them, "So what, are you all musicians?" And they said, "Well, yeah, we're in band, and we really enjoy it." I mean, it was just a normal conversation. And I said, "Well, anything you want to hear?" And they mentioned something, and I played it. So they were just hanging out with me as I was playing. And that little light again started to flicker. And I realized that, and I had taught for about 15 years, I'd developed this ease, talking to what others would consider kind of scary people,
Sure.
It's just so natural. It reminded me that I had developed this comfort, particularly around high school kids, and you almost need that, So it's kind of like a drug because it's such a close relationship. And after that, not long after that, I went back to the classroom.
It's the one thing I do treasure is the ability to be able to have conversations and I wouldn't be so presumptuous as to say I'm a mentor, but I think in talking with some of these students and, just asking them about their lives and sometimes these may be students who no one asks them on a regular basis how they're doing or, what have you. But it's also just some interesting folks in your classroom. Now, some of them not, because they're only interested in one thing. They're interested in the grade. They're interested in moving on. They don't really have they don't have hobbies. They're like professional students, and that can be a bit vapid. But I think there's a lot of students though with whom you can have great conversations, and you can have connections. And there's also, and I don't mean to idealize people under the age of 18, but I think you're more likely to get an honest reaction sometimes from students.
I would agree.
Than you can from adults.
So that's why maybe, when we have to go to those faculty meetings, it's quite different. It's a lot of pretend conversation and politics. There's very little politics in a classroom. They will tell you what you mean, and ideally you tell them what you mean as well. But the other part of it, at least, in my class, teaching German, there was a lot of humor happening. It was really hilarious on both sides all the time. And,
Booze Katze?
Yeah. German stories. And, but the other part that I try to do is let, the students kind of become who they are, let them exaggerate their eccentricities because they're framing their personality. And that's exciting, and because you also put some boundaries because, often they'll try things that are just plain stupid or mean.
Right.
And you kind of chisel them a little bit with some feedback. But for the most part, it's just really, really funny. And there's a lot of laughter, and maybe, people on the outside don't know that, but a classroom is a real funny place.
And the eccentric ones are sometimes the more interesting ones to talk to. And that's where you sometimes can find yourself in a mentoring position. I had a young man who was quite strange, and I remember handing back a test to him one time. He says, "Oh my goodness, I didn't do well." I said, "Be careful. If you're going to be strange, you better be good. Otherwise, you're just strange." So, and it's just, and he goes, "I never thought about it that way." And so you just sit there and have these conversations with these kiddos, and but it's just part of it was when I was a parent before I actually became a parent. And you talked about like kind of raising some of these kiddos and your students. And it's amazing when you talk to their parents sometimes. I've had conversations, not every time, but I've had conversations with parents where they said, our kid at the dinner table every night talks about something you said in class. I'm like, really? I didn't have anything else to talk about,
No, that's pretty good. Boy.
But it makes you feel good. It validates what you're doing, much more so than anything else that's connected to the teaching profession. And because of that, it makes it feel like that you're doing something worthwhile. I think the fact that they're interested in you, I think that can sometimes provide a kind of an affirmation to let you know that maybe you're on the right track. And that can also lead someone out of teacher burnout, is that kind of realization that the kids care, that the kids are interested. They want to know, I have a I have a long-standing policy. I do not talk politics in my class. Well, I don't talk my politics in class. I talk politics all the time, but I don't speak about my particular views. And my kids desperately want to know my particular views.
I'm sure they do.
And so because of that, it leads to kind of interesting conversations. But I think you're right. I think the conversations with students are some of the most treasured elements of the teaching profession.
And I also think that we kind of develop our audience, and for me as a German teacher, I had a specific student. There's a profile of a German student. They want something a little bit different. They're a little bit, again, rough around the edges, but interesting, and back in the early 2000s, you remember there were Gothic kids, a lot of that was pretty big back then. It probably maybe
Sure.
Still is, but there was a time. And so between classes, you'd stand out there, and next to me was a Spanish teacher and a French teacher. We had to stand in line so that kids didn't go crazy in the halls between classes. And so a couple came by next to me and they said, look at those kids. Those must be German kids. Those are mine. So I learned to connect with that kind of kid and treat them well, and as just understand them, and we connected. The other example, when I really knew that I had my students, we were asked to do duty during assemblies, and often you stand in the not the cafeteria, but the auditorium with your arms folded, making sure that kids don't blink or do something stupid. So sure. About 90% of the teachers were in that job, but every once in a while they would send a teacher to what's called Gym 2. It's just another gym where kids could opt out and just hang out because they didn't want that scene of the band playing, the cheerleaders, all the popular kids. They just wanted to sit it out.
Right.
And so my duty on that day was Gym 2. And so I wasn't happy. I thought, oh no, I'm going to have to break up fights. This is going to be really bad. So I walked in there, folded my arms, ready to be official. And I looked up in the bleachers. There were just kids sitting around having casual conversations, laughing, and some kids off to the side by themselves drawing or whatever. But no, they weren't raising hell or anything. They were just. And I looked closer. And about 80% of them were German students up there, in those bleachers. I thought, I know all of these students. What's happening here? And so I decided that my student profile, my kids are Gym 2 students. And I had Gym 2 students for 25 years, and so that's kind of my clientele, I guess.
Well, certainly a benefit of teaching a kind of a specialized subject. For me, everybody's got to swim through U.S. history at some point, and so you get the great unwashed and the great washed, and what have you. So, but there is something to those relationships, and it sometimes is. It's like baseball. Sometimes it can get overly romanticized when people talk about, the teacher, opening up the sky to the student, leading them to enlightenment or what have you. But I think there is something to the idea of how you interact with folks and how successful you are. I think there is a correlation there.
There was a website, one of the schools I taught at has some Facebook group or something, and they asked the students who was their favorite teacher over all these years, and I was happy to be listed a few times, and so that's not the story that they all said, Dr. Bourgeois, yay, but I was surprised at the variety, because I remember all the teachers, and almost every student had a different favorite teacher,
sure.
Who could connect with them. So I think that what we're talking about happened in every classroom, and teachers were popular and important for different reasons, really what those students needed at that time.
Yeah, it's about a sweet spot. I mean, what works one year won't work the year before, and so it's a very precarious thing to have those kind of relationships and being able to connect with students. But that's something I just don't know many of all the teachers that I've known that have gone through a burnout. It usually is not the students. I mean, I'm sure it must be for some folks, because there's some folks that were never meant to be teachers. You and I mean, we've both seen, I know, we've both seen those teachers that have their desk almost like a barricade. To their, they have their desk on one side, they have a little side table, and it's almost like they're kind of quartering themselves off from the students. Those are the people that should probably be on, some sort of job, whatever job search sites there are out there. But I think for a lot of teachers who are burned out, I wonder how much it really has to do with the kiddos and not the context in which all this stuff is happening. So
it's really easy to overstay your welcome. And we probably are on this podcast right now. But I wonder if some teachers just need to, leave in a timely fashion in that case, because it does affect students. They tend to be tougher, meaner, more coarse in their language, and just become difficult. But burnout, we came in here to talk about burnout, and we spent about the last 15, 20 minutes talking about the real deeper meaning and the joys of teaching.
Right.
And so but I do think that what we said earlier, that it changes day to day, and I guess you can tell by how you drive to school in the morning. Are you looking forward to getting there, or are you just dreading it? When you walk into the door, you have hope, or you're thinking, oh no, I'm gonna have to do this again. And that's got to be a real frightening, scary position when you have to walk in and think, I don't want to do this.
Well, yeah. I mean, what the Dalai Lama say is that when you wake up in the morning, if you can't find your purpose, you should just stay in bed. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury. So I can imagine, it would be quite disheartening to have that feeling. So I do feel bad for those folks in that regard. But
we said well at the same time. I like the image.
It's a good sign.
Yeah, I don't know. I like the idea of parking backwards. Are Mr. Miller? Are you parking backwards right now in your penultimate year? Maybe this is.
It varies.
It varies.
It's part of that day-to-day thing I talked about. Where sometimes I go in and sometimes I back in. So.
Okay.
Again, I don't know how much weight you want to put to that, but
I think it's really important. You identified it initially. You're parking back in first. I don't know, Mr. Miller. I'm going to start doing a little bit of research. I can just go over to your school and see where that car is.
Well, come on over.
Make my conclusions that way.
We'll be happy to have you. Just make sure you have a mask. So.
I think we're there.
We're there,
Herr Miller. Well,
good discussion. Good talk.
Yeah, good talk.
Yes.
Thank you, and goodbye, Herr Miller.
Goodbye, Herr Dr. Bourgeois.